What's up, Flannelverse and Endgame Syndicators? I don't know what you call yourselves, people at Endgame Syndicate. Happy to be here live simulcasting in the Flannelverse and on the Endgame Syndicate YouTube channel, doing a little collaboration with an old friend. Adam ShipMyMoney Scherer is here with me. Of course, you know, I love doing showdown breakdowns. This is kind of probably my favorite type of content is showdown content. I love getting into the NFL weeds, and had to bring in Adam, a respected DFS player, nobody who I'd rather take advice from on DFS than Adam. So I like to be able to kind of pick Adam's brain on some of the game theory level stuff. I like digging deep into the players, the teams for these slates. But Adam is as good as anybody I know when it comes to DFS game theory. So happy to be joined by Adam this morning. Adam, how you doing this morning?
Doing pretty well. Glad that most of week one is over, and I actually slept last night and have a lot less work to do like this week. But yeah, looking forward to this show because for me, Showdown is like a game that I think there's money to be made at. I don't think I'm very good at it, especially large field stuff, and I know that you are. So looking forward to talking about that. Yeah, should be a good show.
Yeah, I suspect that you probably are good at it, and it takes so much like mega luck to actually win at Showdown that even the best players, like unless you're playing like probably if you were playing higher stake stuff, you would have had more success by now, I would imagine. But since you're mostly playing the lotto too, it's just you probably just have not realized
Yeah.
realized your edge yet.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the change that I'm making this year too. Is I am playing more of like the 153 max and less of
Nice,
the
nice.
hard stuff because I know the part that I struggle with is like avoiding dupes and putting
Yeah.
myself in situations. But yeah, to your point, also, I can specifically point to a game a couple years ago where if they got a call right, I would think I was really good at Showdown because
Right. Yeah, exactly. It just takes like one flip to like, oh, I've had a lot of success at Showdown
right, exactly.
versus like, yeah. Yeah, Steven, hey guys, get any sleep? I still have not gotten any sleep. I think I got about 6 hours last night, so better than my average over the past week. But initially before we decided to do the show, I was thinking this is going to be the day that I really sleep in. But then I was too excited about doing this show. So no, I have not slept a lot. So I'm still extremely sleep deprived. But tomorrow I'm sleeping in for sure. 100% gonna finally get some sleep tomorrow. What's up, Paul? What's up, Steven? Really good to have you guys here with us. We're just going to go through position by position, kind of the same structure as what I've been doing in the evening shows prior to lock. I have done a good amount of research. I think there's still a little bit left for me to do, but I think that we are in a good spot to talk about these players. Starting with quarterback, I mean, I feel like quarterback is always the most boring part to talk about because it's usually like, yeah, you can play quarterbacks. Like, you don't need to in all of your lineups. I'll probably have each of these quarterbacks in close to 50% of my lineups. I guess they're neither of them is really rushing quarterbacks. So you don't have that. But how are you feeling about the quarterbacks? I know you've run some sims. Maybe you have some more data about what you plan to be doing at this point in the day.
No, I mean, I think that your overall point is pretty much where I'm at. And looking at how they showed up in the first set of sims I ran with my projections, they kind of just don't matter. Like, I think that the flex ownership is pretty much where it should be. I think that the captain ownership is pretty much where it should be. So there's really not much interesting that I think. The only thing I guess that is kind of interesting to talk about is like is Aaron Rodgers because I think there's just kind of this assumption that like Aaron Rodgers is just going to be Aaron Rodgers, not prime Aaron Rodgers, but just like a semi good version of Aaron Rodgers. And it is his first game back from an Achilles injury. He could just absolutely suck. So like there is some inherent volatility in his production and by extension the Jets production in general that I think you kind of like it's hard to quantify and you can kind of just I think no ball take it. If you think he's going to suck, just lower his projection kind of thing. I don't really know if there's a better way to do it, but outside of that, if you do just assume that he's going to be a competent version of Aaron Rodgers, I don't really see anything at quarterback that is particularly interesting.
Yeah, so I guess I'll amend my take a little bit to say I think I might take the approach today, and I don't feel really good about it, but I think I might take the approach of fading the quarterbacks, like not full fading, but like being underweight on the quarterbacks, just playing it through like both these teams are sort of slower paced. So I think that we have like good defenses, slower paced teams could result in a really low scoring game. And just due to like the scoring dynamics on DraftKings in particular, but also FanDuel, like just every passing play, the receiver outscoring the quarterback, it's a lot easier to rack up fantasy points as a skill position player than a quarterback, or especially a non-rushing quarterback without scoring touchdowns. So I kind of like the idea of playing it through like okay, I'm just going to play fewer quarterbacks in my lineups in general, play it through the skill position players, play the kickers, play the defenses, and kind of lightly fade the quarterbacks and hope for a low scoring game. I'd feel a
Yeah.
little bit better about that if both of the defenses were fully healthy, because like I think they're theoretically elite defenses, but then like Reddick is out, and then we've got Greenlaw, just several good defensive players out. That makes me a little bit scared to do it, but I think I might do it anyway. What do you think of
Well,
that
I'll just say
approach?
the kind of counterpoint to that too, in addition to the what you were saying about the defenses, is the playmakers in this game are banged up. McCaffrey's banged up.
True,
Ayuk's
good point.
expected to be limited. Williams is expected to be limited. So then it kind of becomes like, obviously Debo's good, Kittle's good, Brees is good, but like it kind of like comes back full circle to like, okay, maybe there's just not a ton of, to me, there's not a ton of just like surefire like smash plays in this game. Like I have McCaffrey, including captain and flex positions, showing up as being optimal like 70% of the time combined, and that's first on the slate. I have Purdy second, I have Rodgers fourth, but they're both, below 60% of the time. So to me, it's just kind of a slate where it's really flat because there's question marks on the quarterbacks from a fantasy standpoint, but then there's question marks on a lot of the best playmakers too.
No, that is a really good point. For those who have not looked at the injury stuff, Mike Williams, they're saying he's going to be on a similar path to what Brees Hall was on last year, where he was like, I think he started the year with around 30% snap participation, just was not all that involved early in the year. Of course, you never really know, like when coaches say, oh yeah, he's on kind of the same trajectory. What does he mean by that? Like maybe he's going to be limited to start the year. I don't know. So I don't think we can just assume that it's going to be the exact same, but
right. Well, and then the other thing too, and I mean, I guess we could just talk about this more at receiver, but the other thing too is when people use snap percentage as like the metric, not all snaps are created equal. If Williams is going to be on the sideline on like downs where they're likely to run, I don't care. If he's going to play 100% of the snaps that they're in the red zone, that's still good. So, even that, there's a lot of volatility in exactly what that means.
Yeah, we're comparing a running back to a wide receiver, and with wide receivers, we really care about the route share more so than the snap share. So yeah, that's a good point. It's really hard to know what to make of it. I think we'll talk about Mike Williams when we get to receivers. You also Brandon Ayuk is they say probably limited to start the year. Kind of a funny quote from Shanahan, like, I'd be surprised if he's not limited in this game. Like from the coach, like, what do you mean you'd be surprised? You get to decide how much he plays. But
peak NBA coach right there.
Yeah, so probably not expecting a full route share for Ayuk, and then he's going to get maybe shadow coverage. Sauce Gardner said this offseason that he would like to do a little bit more shadow coverage this season, so I think would be more likely to shadow Ayuk than Debo. So I don't know. We do have very limited options in terms of skill position players that we're really confident in. To your point, as far as and I don't know if you've looked at this in your Sims, Adam. With these quarterbacks, I'm always stacking just because neither of them runs a whole lot. And then if I have them in the captain spot, I'd rather double stack. I think when at our old site, when we ran out Sims, it didn't always come out in ways that made sense to me intuitively early on. It probably maybe has changed closer to my thinking now, but you would see sometimes in the Sims, you'd see quarterbacks show up without any stacking partners, even when they were not rushing quarterbacks. I think I would, especially in this game, be pretty disinclined to play the quarterbacks unstacked and not at least double stacked from the captain spot. Have you noticed any trends in your Sims as far as like quarterback stacking?
Yeah, so I don't have it as far as like how many pass catchers with Rodgers at captain, but like when Rodgers shows up at captain, it does have Wilson 64% of the time. It has Brees 57%. Gibson 34%, Williams 34%, Lazard 13%. So just from that, I assume it's stacking pretty heavily with Rodgers. With Purdy, pretty similar. McCaffrey and Debo both like 55 to 60%. Kittle 36%, Ayuk 32%. So I do assume that it's stacking pretty heavily when they do show up at captain.
Yeah, and I've been sort of tracking like for the past 3 years, like how often does it not go the way I assume it, and it's like very infrequently you see it not. You see these like statue quarterbacks get in there unstacked. I think we've seen it happen or like get close with like a Derek Carr when it was just like, oh, he happened to throw one touchdown and it was, or like two touchdowns, but both of the people who scored touchdowns were like low salary and didn't do anything else for the entire game. So like, I don't know. So he almost made it in unstacked, but it's pretty rare, pretty unlikely that these quarterbacks make it in unstacked. So if you are playing them, I would stack up both quarterbacks. And as Adam maybe mentioned in his sims, both of the running backs this game definitely qualify as pass catching, as stacking partners with their quarterbacks. Sometimes there will be running backs who aren't as good of stacking partners, but I think Breece Hall and Christian McCaffrey both qualify very much as pass catchers to stack with your quarterback. What's up, Jake? All right. Any other notes on quarterback? You ready to move on to running backs?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, we will talk about some running backs. Let me pull up the projections page just to make sure that that's not running backs. Uh-oh. Do I not have running backs up? Maybe I don't. All right, let me move this to running backs. But Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, I guess we can start with the obvious running backs. How much do you think exposure you're going to get to McCaffrey and Hall?
I think I'll get a lot. I do think so. At least right now, for me, it looks like they are both going really over owned at flex, but under owned at captain in my initial sims. So it makes me obviously think that I'll be playing them both at captain ideally. And I think it's a pretty easy slate to do that too, which is maybe why it's showing up that way. Just going back to what we were saying before, where there's a lot of talent in this game, but there's question marks about how much Ayuk and Williams are going to play. So you're talking about one of the top receivers on each team. I think, and you don't have rushing quarterbacks, so they become less of a priority at captain. So and then also both running backs catching passes. Normally the reason it's hard to have running backs show up as optimal in captain a lot of the time is because they're not really correlated with their teammates. They also negatively correlate with the opposing defense, and it becomes really difficult to build a good lineup where the most important guy in your lineup negatively correlates with most of the game. But that's not the case with either of these guys. They both positively correlate with their quarterback, to some extent with their pass catchers, because if the team's just scoring a lot, then it's good for everybody. So they both look like really good captain plays to me right now compared to current ownership projections.
Yeah, I think they both make a lot of sense at captain. I've looked a little bit around the industry. It seems like they are going to get, a fair amount of captain ownership, but yeah, still not like, I don't know. Seems reasonable to me. I guess to me it looks like they're getting about reasonable. Like I'm seeing Christian McCaffrey over 20% projected ownership at captain, which I think he should be. So you think he should be even more than like 25%?
Yeah, I was just saying, to clarify, I have them with the two highest captain ownership projections, but I think that they're going on their own still. Right now I have McCaffrey at 28%. I have Hall at 15. I have McCaffrey optimal 29% and Hall 17.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like reasonable numbers. So yeah, two of the better captains on the slate. I think a lot of the time we want to people are inclined to find the cheap captain and then just play all of the best plays in the flex. And I think you really do need raw points in the captain spot most of the time. So I like the idea of paying up for these guys that are just have the ability to put up a score that you need to have in the captain spot. So yeah, I like both.
Something else that I think is one, it's a reason that they look good on this slate specifically. But the other thing that's kind of nice too about using them at captain, even if they are getting relatively high raw ownership, is you have more paths to go with the rest of your lineup when you're using a running back at captain. That's just from a dupe standpoint or just a lineup similarity standpoint. If you're using Aaron Rodgers or Purdy at captain, then you're kind of funneled into the same build as everybody else, or you're just playing a really weird, shitty lineup with one of those guys naked at captain. Whereas if you go with one of the running backs at captain, you can still pair them with the quarterback if you want, but you don't need to. If I filter with Breece Hall at captain, the guy used most often in those lineups or showing up as optimal most often in those lineups is Aaron Rodgers, but it's only 61% of the time. McCaffrey 56%. Other than that, nobody's showing up as optimal more than 42% of the time. So it's really flat for the most part as far as who is optimal as a flex when Hall is captain. And it's the same, very similar with McCaffrey. So it does, even though you have a pretty popular captain, I think the initial thought is I just don't want to play a captain that 15 to 25% of the field is playing. You then have more flexibility throughout the rest of your lineup to get different because you don't run into the situation where there's very clear-cut best plays and you're taking a huge haircut as far as projection goes if you go a different route.
It's a really good point. If you put a quarterback, especially a quarterback in captain, then it's if I have Aaron Rodgers in captain, almost all the time, Garrett Wilson's probably going to be in there, maybe Alan Lazard, Tyler Conklin, but there's like limited types of like combos that can be in the flex when you have Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. Whereas, like you say, you just kind of open things up by playing a running back in the flex. And when you have, there are some running backs that are in the captain spot. There's some running backs I'm like, I don't really want to put them in the captain spot because they don't have that kind of upside. That's definitely not the case with these two. These are running backs that can absolutely break the slate. The 49ers struggled against running backs last year. The 49ers defense in the playoffs gave up like 5.1 yards per carry to running backs. Could happen again. Maybe they fixed their holes, but it is just at least worth noting that they were a little bit susceptible to giving up yards on the run last year. I think both of these, and we got Trent Williams back for the 49ers fully healthy. So very good spot for the running backs in general. I think I generally like these running backs more than I usually do on showdown slates, which that's not saying much. These are the two running backs who were drafted 1 and 3, both in the first round in best ball all summer. Obviously great running backs. But I think particularly on this slate, I'm probably going to be leaning into these starting running backs quite a bit. It is worth noting that, as you said earlier, McCaffrey kind of coming in a little bit banged up. He says he's not concerned about it, but you never really know what players mean by that. And sometimes they just say that when they don't really mean it. Any interest in going to like a Jordan Mason? He's 3,000. I think I have some interest there. Doesn't project well point per dollar at all. But what do you think about playing Jordan Mason?
Yeah, see, that's one that I feel like I'm gonna have to just kind of think about more during the day. Right
Yeah.
now, in my initial run, he's showing up as over-owned. Like you said, doesn't project that well from a point per dollar standpoint. And then right now, projected for like 7% flex ownership. I have him as optimal like 4% of the time. So the way I have it projected right now is McCaffrey essentially, being full go, and there not being a huge benefit to playing Mason because even though he's low owned, he just doesn't come through often enough at that price relative to his ownership. But that's, the perfect example, kind of the same thing that I was saying about, or similar, what I was saying about like Aaron Rodgers, and we'll get to it with the Jets receivers too. It's very kind of take based where that's with McCaffrey getting essentially a full
Yep.
work. I wouldn't have to dial McCaffrey back that much, assuming that all of the dialing back on McCaffrey is a bump for Mason to then get Mason as like a really good play at low ownership. So it really just comes down to how you think it's going to be split. I am inclined right now to think that basically the way I'm viewing it is McCaffrey is riskier than usual because most weeks you're going in and there's not a question in the world about how much of a workload McCaffrey's going to get. So I think there's more volatility there and he's riskier than usual. Right now, my inclination is still that he's just fine and going to get the bulk of the work.
I think I was listening to your show on Sunday morning, and you made the point that week one, especially, like there is fragility in the inputs into the
Yeah.
sims, like which is kind of what you're saying right now. And I think that's a really sharp way of putting it. It's just like we don't really know. And I think especially this week with McCaffrey being banged up, I think that yeah, I agree with you. Like obviously the most likely outcome is that he's still just like the workhorse. But we don't know to what extent he is going to be limited. Maybe they're going in with actually the expectation of Jordan Mason getting a little bit more run. Most likely, as we say, it's probably they're going in with the expectation that McCaffrey is the guy again, that he's just going to be a bell cow. But even if they go in with that expectation, coming in limited, he's also more susceptible to an in-game injury. So I do think there's a lot of, as you said, fragility in the inputs right now, which is the reason that I think that I have interest in Jordan Mason, because I think he might have, first of all, more standalone value than sites are giving him credit for. Maybe not. I think it's just we just don't know. So I like to lean into the we just don't know on Showdown. So I think that he might have more standalone value, might just have somewhat of a role because McCaffrey is limited, but then also has more opportunity for that contingent upside because McCaffrey is a little bit banged up, is a little bit more likely to get hurt inside the game.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, yes, that's basically
I
it.
kind of think in a situation like this, maybe the best way to approach it is kind of tournament by tournament. Like if you're playing, in my case, where I'm really focusing on the smaller field, 3-max type stuff, I mostly just want to be as accurate as I can in my projections because I don't have that many opponents. The trade-off to projecting something that I don't think is the most likely to happen, but being right when it does isn't that high because there's not as much money to win. Whereas in your large field tournaments, even if I think the most likely case is that McCaffrey is just McCaffrey and he gets his, close to his normal workload, there's not a huge payoff to being right that Christian McCaffrey is really good because everybody thinks that. Whereas even if I think it's not very likely that Jordan Mason plays a bigger role here, even if I take that approach, there's still potentially a bigger payoff to just having a bunch of lineups where low owned Jordan Mason splits carries with McCaffrey, for example. That's an extreme example, but like even if I think that's going to be wrong more often, there's a big payoff in your large field tournaments to still just playing that. Whereas in your smaller field stuff, you're kind of just you're burning money by projecting a situation that you don't think is the most likely to happen.
Yeah, that is a very good context and a good reminder that I need to be reminding people because I do have people who are finding my channel who don't know me that well. I come from a very I play the largest field contest on DraftKings, so all of my analysis basically assumes that you're playing the largest field stuff, which is why I lean into that volatility more and don't make these do say, hey, what if Jordan Mason has more standalone value, has more contingent value? So the reason that we come at it with different approaches is I'm playing only like the lotto style largest field stuff where you do get paid off the most when the field is wrong, whereas Adam is playing some of the smaller field stuff. So that is definitely some good context as to how you want to play it with Jordan Mason, Christian McCaffrey split.
And like a lot of that stuff, like the differences between contests is accounted for in like a good process using an optimizer or Sims or whatever. It's just factored in my range of outcomes. But like in a situation like this, like range of outcomes is still built around your median projections. So in a situation like this, I almost think for larger field tournaments, having a median projection on somebody like Jordan Mason that is less likely to be right, but is still going to be right some percentage of the time is almost like a better way to approach it.
Yeah. I see Justin Steele in chat. I did wear my Cubs hat because I suspected that you were going to show up here. What's up, Justin? Good to see you. I was talking with Justin and Drew last night, really digging deep into some of the stats for this game. So I wasn't sure if you guys they were staying up even later than I was. I thought maybe Justin and Drew, who was already here, would be sleeping still at this point. But good to see you guys are up and well. Eric Tridell asked, "Am I crazy to not play McCaffrey in my single entry?" I don't think so. Maybe somewhat depends on the size of the field. I don't even think it does. I think, yeah, not crazy. What do you think?
I don't really think it's ever crazy to like not play somebody in a given tournament. Like I assume I'll have him probably. I don't know. Like he's still showing up as like the best overall play on the slate for me, but I guarantee I can find lineups that project to make money that don't have Christian McCaffrey. So it's kind of like how bad is the rest of your lineup, but you can, I think, make winning lineups that don't have him.
Yeah, definitely. Good to see all of you guys here. G Stug, Jim, Ryan, what's up? I briefly named this show Showdown with Ship and the Shaman. that was in the YouTube, and I was like, this is just too much of a mouthful. So I just took out the title entirely.
You didn't change it to Showdown with Neil Orfield, winner of a Millie Maker, and
yeah, and guy who's never won a million.
Right? Yeah.
No, I should have. That would have been even better. I went with the alliterative approach instead. All right, Jake. Yeah, Jake, love that. Hopefully it is Jordan Mason for all the money. That would be good for my best ball bags, which are hurting a little bit this week. How are your best balls looking at them?
They're okay. Not great. I am pissed about Isaiah Likely. He's like he is the only draftable player in the NFL that went to my college, and I still just don't have a lot of him. So should have easily been on him. I don't have a lot of Cooper Kupp, so that didn't go well. Some other stuff did, but yeah, pissed about Likely and Kupp.
Yeah, it went pretty piss poor for me overall because I don't have much Likely. Kupp was one of my bigger fades early on. I was really in on Puka Nacua, Marvin Harrison. So like both of that looks, I mean, it's week one, so I'm not overly worried about it just yet, but one reception for 4 yards from Marvin Harrison. I kind of thought he was going to come in and immediately just be awesome in that offense. So I'm a little bit nervous. And I also was pretty into the elite tight ends, which was just a matter of like where they're going in drafts now. They're falling a little bit later. I think that there are so many of them. Like someone has to really separate from this group. Somebody's going to be awesome. And this week, just like they were awful. So
yeah, having a lot of Colby Parkinson looks good for me. Jalen Hurts too. Like he's my highest owned quarterback, and if he's not going to run, that's not going to go well.
Yeah. Derek asks, first of all, congrats on your 30% likely. I'm jealous. He says, could you guys talk about the strategy for single entry showdown versus MME? I think it depends on the size of the contest. Is there so I don't think I play enough single entry showdown that it becomes difficult for me to really differentiate other than I think that the chalk tends to get chalkier in single entry is sort of my impression of single entry. But then from there it's just a matter of like how large field is it. Like the more important factor for me isn't the number of entries you can put in, it's the number of total entries in the contest. Do you see it? How do you play single entry, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's kind of true across sports. Is in single entry, you do generally get higher ownership percentages on the chalk, but you have less opponents to beat. And even in like your larger field single entries, you have a lot of opponents, but it's still going to be fewer than MME. But also, you have very weak opponents because there's only so many good DFS players. Period. And if you're in a large field single entry, like just a large percentage of that field's going to suck. So generally, I just think that you can stick a little bit closer to projections. You don't have to get as creative. And that goes back to what we were talking about with Jordan Mason. Like, there's no reason to even really think about like projecting Jordan Mason, quote unquote, wrong in a single entry field. You're going to be better off either just playing McCaffrey, or if you really don't want McCaffrey, just don't play McCaffrey. As opposed to large field, you're worrying a lot more about dupes. You're worrying a lot more about like different projection sets, like we were saying of, you can talk about the Jets receivers too. Like, what do projections look like if Alan Lazard is just the clear wide receiver 2 today? What do projections
Right.
look like if Mike Williams plays a bigger role than we think? What do projections look like if Malachi Corley suddenly is a competent NFL player? Like there's like entirely different ways probably that you should be projecting the game to go in large field, and then finding like the best lineups you can play from those different projection sets, I think. Whereas in small field, you can get away a lot more with just saying, what's the most likely way this game goes and how do I win it?
Yep. All right, that's good. Good analysis. Ship does more single entry than I do. All right. The only other running back, and I honestly I have not looked that deep into Braylon Allen like quotes for this game. I think he pretty clearly won the RB2 role on the Jets. I think he definitely has continued upside. So I like Braylon Allen already at 2,800, but I have not heard anything about. I mean, it's pretty safe to assume it's still just going to be the Brees Hall show, and Braylon Allen will just get a little bit of run. I think that's probably a safe bet, but maybe worth reading some quotes from the coaches. But how much interest do you have in a 2,800 Braylon Allen? Is that a different bet for you, do you think, than Jordan Mason?
Yeah, he looks better to me than Mason. Again, using the example where McCaffrey is just a full go essentially, just because he is cheaper, like 10% flex ownership projected to Allen right now. He showed up as optimal about 14% of the time for me. At that price, he just doesn't need to do that much. I'm looking now. I want to see how often he actually shows up with Brees at captain, because I think
Yeah,
that'll give an idea of exactly kind of what kind of game from him do you need.
right.
He showed up in 21% of my Brees Hall captain lineups. So I think that really speaks to, at his price and also just in the context of this slate, you don't need a huge game from him for him to still be optimal, because obviously, like in the Sims that I ran, he is negatively correlated with Hall, and didn't even matter that much. It's just, in his projected role, he still shows up as optimal at 2,800 a decent percent of the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of games like 2,800, I think one vulture touchdown would not be enough. But I think
Right.
this is a game where one vulture touchdown from Braylon Allen, who might be the goal line back, like he's a big bruising back, so he could come in for like the 1 yard line touchdown. So it's a little bit more viable for him to be optimal with like literally just 7 fantasy points at 2,800. Most slates, I don't think that would be enough. Like you need a little bit more than 7 fantasy points, but just gives him extra opportunity to be useful because this might be a low scoring game without a lot of touchdowns in general. So yeah, that makes sense. I think that he would show up a fair amount with Brees Hall at captain, but that is good to hear. I guess we
It's
can
kind of
also
funny too with this slate. Like, it's really easy to think of what you were just saying, where just doing anything at 2,800 makes you optimal because your competition is Lazard and Corley and and these other guys. But then there is the version of this game where like one of Lazard or Corley or somebody actually plays a significant role, and Braylon Allen's like drawing dead to being optimal.
True. Yeah, there are different ways that this can go for sure. Um, the only other running back to talk about, I guess, is fullback Kyle Juszczyk, uh, 600. So I guess I haven't looked at. Are there any other better? There might be better, cheaper options. I think that there might be some 200 receivers on the Niners who could be valuable, or I don't know. We'll look at the receivers in a second. But how much Kyle Juszczyk are you getting in your lineups?
He's optimal for me like 5% of the time. He's in that same bucket with like every other sub 1K guy, basically.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull up his game log real quickly from last year because I feel like he didn't really do a ton last year, but I just want to double check. If double check myself on that because he's a guy that like he gets targeted a little bit historically, but I feel like that role kind of went away. Yeah, he had 1 4 target game last year, one with 3. So 17 total targets for the year. So basically a target per game on average, but did have a couple spike weeks there. Had a game with 12.6 fantasy points last year, one with 10.6. So he has had some games where he's been relevant. Probably needs a touchdown to really pay off. Maybe not. He didn't score a single. Wait. Okay, yeah, he did. Those were both games where he scored receiving touchdowns. Okay. So yeah,
I mean, I think the nice thing for Juszczyk is like whatever limited touches he gets probably do skew a little bit heavier to being in the red zone.
Yeah.
Whereas
For sure.
like somebody like Isaiah Davis that's down there, at the bottom, where like, yeah, maybe he gets a couple touches, maybe he doesn't. But if he gets a random carry here or there, it's pretty unlikely to be at the goal line ahead of Hall or Allen. Whereas, whatever limited touches Juszczyk gets are likely to be relatively close to the goal line.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like he's the one that like his touches are usually high value touches. Similar to like Chiefs backup tight ends, where it's just like, right, he's not going to touch the ball except for they'll do a little underhanded touchdown at the goal line. Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, he's probably it's one of those. I kind of love and hate these players, but it's just like, yeah, there are a couple. He's going to score a couple touchdowns this year at some point. It could happen in this game. So you got to think like if he's going to score 2 touchdowns this year in 18 games, he's got about a 1 in 9 chance, approximately. Obviously, this is all just like estimating, but like of like putting up 8 fantasy points, which might be enough at his price tag. And then you just have to look at, okay, those are the approximate odds, and this is his approximate ownership, and that's kind of how you determine whether he's somebody you want to play. That's sort of loosey goosey math, but essentially that's kind of how I think about it with these guys. It's like, yeah, if he scores a touchdown, you'll probably want him. If he doesn't score a touchdown, you're not going to want him. That's right. What it comes down to with Juszczyk.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess there's like the counter argument too, where like, yeah, he's likely to get pretty high value touches, but like Ronnie Bell or Chris Conley, somebody that anytime they touch the ball, they're getting a point just for touching it, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Odunze getting an MRI. Yeah, that is not ideal. I don't love to hear that. Yes, the winning $5 Millie Maker lineup was an unstacked Josh Allen. So everybody go play unstacked Josh Allen. Don't stack any of your quarterbacks next week, please.
To be fair, that lineup did actually have a lot of correlation. It just wasn't with Josh Allen.
Oh, really? I didn't actually look at it.
Yeah, well, because I wanted to like really make fun of it when I first saw it, especially because the lineup that finished like 200ths of a point behind it or something, like correlated really well throughout like their entire lineup. And so at first I was like, man, that really sucks. Like he did, everything you're quote unquote supposed to do, and then just like gets edged out by this team. But like he did at least have like some 2-man stacks and like some game stacks from other games. He just had Josh Allen by himself.
Okay. We'll cover who's most likely to smash under 4,000. Might be Lazard. I don't know. We'll look at some of once we get through all the positions. Maybe I'll answer more of these questions. That's funny. Hoosier Daddy. Hoosier Devos. Different. I'm mixing up 2 different names. Yeah. All right. We will move on and take a look at the wide receivers. 1 second here.
I actually kind of liked that Millie winning lineup. Like, kind of just like I would never have made it or played it, I don't think. But like thinking back, one of the big reasons I didn't really like Josh Allen this week was that even if he did well, I had no idea who you were supposed to pair him with out of that receiving group. And obviously, like he does have rushing touchdown upside. So like thinking back, it's kind of like, oh well, the answer could have just been, you play the best quarterback and just don't bother pairing.
Yeah, yeah. I always struggle with that. I mean, that's one of those things that I like. I never play unstacked quarterbacks in general, which is something that like kind of Alex taught me was just like not me directly, but like listening to shows with Alex Baker on them.
Yeah.
He was a big proponent of always stacking your quarterback, even when you had those situations where it was like, all right, you've got a $4,000 rushing quarterback. You can obviously see ways where it gets there. I think, and I don't want to misquote him, but I feel like he was always a pretty big proponent of finding ways to stack your quarterback just to limit the number of things you need to get right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'm the same way. Like I rarely do it, but that's kind of like why I can see it is playing Josh Allen. Like if you play Josh Allen and are guaranteed Josh Allen has a big game, you still don't really have any idea what else went right because he has so many guys that could have caught a touchdown. They could catch one touchdown and not really be good at all. So like normally it's like, oh, well, if I assume this quarterback does well, it makes it really obvious a couple other pieces of my lineup. Whereas with Josh Allen, it's like, yeah, it really clarifies nothing.
Yeah, exactly. That's funny, spurious news. I'll come back and try to answer more of your questions later. This is funny from Justin. Is there any conditioning that goes into the offseason for you to prepare for? There's no amount of conditioning that can prepare you for 150 stream drafts, Justin. Try it sometime. Impossible. All right. Wide receivers, top projection on the slate. I guess let's go team by team. So we'll start with the Jets. So Garrett Wilson has the top projection on the slate. He's 9,800. Last year, you look at his like expected fantasy points. If you look in the here, I'll pull up the fantasy points data suite from last year. Sort by expected fantasy points. Garrett Wilson, number 3 on the list in terms of expected fantasy points, 303 expected fantasy points. He scored 215. You look at the guys above him, they just absolutely, and below him, just absolutely dominated him in actual fantasy points. So you would expect with Aaron Rodgers here, if he's just a competent quarterback instead of being Zach Wilson, that's a massive upgrade. Garrett Wilson probably going to realize some of those expected fantasy points. What do you think of Garrett Wilson in this one, Adam?
Yeah, I like obviously think he looks good. I think he's going a little bit over-owned, but at the same time, at flex, I think he's going less over-owned than McCaffrey and Brees. But I do think he's going a little over-owned at both captain and flex, but it's not by like a huge margin or anything. And it's, still obviously looks like one of the best plays. And then Rodgers coming back again should be a benefit. Is it in week 1? Who knows, but should be. Also, not having to compete with Mike Williams as often for targets should probably be a benefit. But then at the same time, like if Mike Williams is playing 100% of red zone plays, doesn't matter as much.
Yeah, let's talk about Mike Williams. So that one, I feel like I'm fading Mike Williams, but it scares me. So you can see here, he's 6,600. He's expected to be limited. But I mean, you make a good point that like if he's limited in the sense that he runs 40% of routes, but then those routes are all in the red zone because they want to use their big bodied, talented, go up and get a receiver in the red zone, then suddenly he could score 2 touchdowns. Like it definitely could bury me to fade him. I think I'm still inclined to fade him, but let me take a look at projected ownership. As I recall, it's actually pretty low.
It's really low.
Yeah. So I don't know. I've been saying I'm going to fade Mike Williams, maybe even entirely, like might put him out of my player pool, but I might look like a real donkey if I do that because I think you're right. Like he could just be in there for, the valuable plays in the red zone, that kind of stuff. Like that feels like the kind of role, if you do have a limited Mike Williams, that's where you would want to use him, is in the red zone. So maybe I'll change my stance. What do you think?
I'm kind of going back and forth on it because right now I have him being one of the most under-owned flex plays on the slate, but that's also like there's no way to account for kind of like a pitch count. So it's I only have him projected for like 7.5 fantasy points, but he is kind of in a price tier by himself at 6,600. But the thing, again, you have to keep in mind when you're doing Sims based stuff is that it's still likely overestimating his ceiling and what his best games look like because it doesn't know that he's likely to just not be out there that often.
Right.
So I think that the ownership ultimately is probably pretty close to correct, even though it's showing up for me as going under-owned. It's probably the way he's priced. It's probably if he catches a touchdown, he's a good play, and if he doesn't, he's not.
But like the way he's priced, he'll probably need more than a touchdown too, right? Like obviously, maybe a touchdown is a 40-yard touchdown, so then it's 11 fantasy points. Maybe that's enough at 6,600. But
I feel like one touchdown is borderline because if he is having a decent game, like a touchdown and some yards, because if he's having a decent game, it does lower the likelihood of one of the cheaper guys on the Jets having a good game.
True. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking even in a low scoring game at his price tag, he probably needs at least like 9 fantasy points, 8
Right.
fantasy points. I don't know what it would be. So it can't just be like a 2-yard touchdown, but like
Right.
you're right. He'll probably
Yeah,
add
yeah.
in at
Like
least
I'm
another
assuming he
reception
makes
or
a couple
2.
other catches, and
Yeah,
then
yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Gotcha. Yep. Um, so then the other one with Mike Williams potentially being limited is Alan Lazard. He's 2,000. Oh, and Xavier Gibson, I guess we need to talk about. Uh, Actually, there's Malachi Corley is somebody that we should probably talk about too. So we have a few Jets to get through, and it's kind of a mess. Like this is sort of one of those slates where it's like it's not really clear cut what I think is the best approach. Probably we're all going to look like donkeys after the slate is over, but it's worth talking about anyway. Alan, actually, let's start with Xavier Gibson. He's 2,400 projected for 4.4 fantasy points at the Fantasy Points website. Um, Probably gonna have some role here. I'm a little bit surprised to see him projected better than Alan Lazard. I was thinking Alan Lazard probably gonna play in 2 wide receiver sets. How are you playing? I guess those two or any tertiary Jets receiving options that you want to talk about.
Yeah, so right now I have Lazard projected a bit ahead of Gibson, but I have Gibson going. I have them. I have Gibson going a little bit under owned and Lazard a little bit over owned. I think that's going to end up changing for me though, because I am also of the mindset that Lazard is kind of the guy here. I use the guy loosely,
Yeah,
but like for one, we know how much Aaron Rodgers trusts him, and there's just not much else that you can point to as being like anything he can trust. Sure, Gibson could be on the field and play a role, but what have we seen to suggest that like Aaron Rodgers has any trust in him at all? Malachi Corley, everything coming out of the preseason is that he's not NFL ready yet. So,
yeah,
like, could he, could they just scheme him like a screen and he houses it? Yeah, there's potential there. But when I look at the non, Brees Hall, Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams guys on the Jets, Tyler Conklin, we know his role too. But like when I look at the other receivers, it seems really obvious to me that Lazard plays a bigger role here than anybody would actually want outside of like Aaron Rodgers.
yeah. That's kind of how I see it too. It feels like he's probably going to have a big role here, even though everybody knows he's not especially good. But Aaron Rodgers likes him, wants him on the team. Seems like he's going to be the wide receiver too when Mike Williams is not out there. So I do think that I have some interest there. I'm now.
If Aaron Rodgers isn't like lobbying, so one, Lazard probably isn't even worse than Gibson or Corley at this point,
Right.
like from a talent standpoint. And then also just from I want somebody out there that I can rely on other than Garrett Wilson standpoint. Like if Rodgers isn't lobbying to get Lazard on the field in this game, why did he get Lazard on the team? Period.
Yeah. Good point. This is the exact situation with Mike Williams limited where you'd want Lazard on the team. So yeah, the expectation is that Lazard is going to be playing quite a bit. He's 2,000. That gives me some interest. I looked at just a couple other projection sources right now. Seems like it's kind of, I wouldn't say all over the place, but like they do flip in some other projections, Lazard and Gibson,
Yeah.
but they're all always pretty close to this, where they are like within like a fantasy point of each other, projected pretty low. Um, I feel like this is a slate where like I'm we're gonna want to play comfortable. Like in my brain, I'm like, well, I like Tyler Conklin because I know his role. I want to play Conklin, and then it's just gonna be one of these guys that like we don't really know the pecking order. One of them is gonna be in the winning lineup. It feels like.
Right. And to me, like to your point about looking at projections across the industry, I've always been on shows and stuff very just trust the projections, blah blah blah. But you do have to keep in mind too when you're using like there are situations where you should be willing to kind of just have a stance on something like this because the projections are like obviously based on inputs, and the inputs here are really volatile. But when you're talking about big projection sites, and this isn't a knock on them, it's just kind of how they have to do it. They're giving you like the median outcome from like how things could go.
Yep.
Because when you have all these people paying you however much they pay you for projections, it's really risky to just go in there and project Alan Lazard for 8 points, Gibson for 2, and Gibson barely and Corley not to step on the field or something.
Yep.
Because you're just going to be like really, really wrong a decent percentage of the time, and people are going to be really pissed off about it. You're better off saying like, oh yeah, these guys all are decent at their price. If people are paying you hundreds of dollars a month for you to tell them that. But in my stuff, I and this is what I was saying, like it's going to change for me once I'm not just looking at my baseline stuff. Like I'm most likely going to project Lazard to be that guy. If he's not the guy, then I'm just not going to win tonight, and I'm fine with that because I don't have 1,000 people giving me $100 a month to give them projections.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've always thought about it that way of like, yeah, it's way more risky to, I mean, you kind of just laid out the exact scenario, but like to say that Lazard project him for 8 fantasy points and project 0 for Gibson, just like be like, oh yeah, Lazard is going to be the guy. We know this because then if the other way goes, everybody's going to be like, how the hell did you give Lazard all of that when Gibson was actually the starter? Like you just knew you had the depth chart all wrong. Whereas because we don't know, you just project them the same,
Right.
and it's like, yeah, you can't really argue with that. Like, oh, it was a coin flip and went the
Just
other
think
way.
about what Twitter looks like the next day, right? Like
Yeah,
if you're a big projection site and you just commit to Alan Lazard, and like if Alan Lazard does great, then yeah, sure, you have a ton of screenshots to promote. But if you just give like the median projections based on basically median out like inputs, you're gonna have some people that were like, oh, so and so got me onto Corley, if that's the guy you needed, or got me on to Gibson, if that's the guy you needed. And you're not gonna have anybody screaming like, how did you project this guy for 0 when he scored
right.
12?
Yeah, exactly. Um, and yeah, Malachi Corley, I don't know. Like he could be like a gadgety player that maybe they put him in the red zone for a random play and he scores a touchdown, or he might just not see the field. Maybe he's inactive. I think there's a real possibility that he's also just inactive this game and we don't have to think about it. But or do you have any plans for Corley?
No, I agree with you completely. Like him and Gibson both, I could see where they just kind of get the ball into their hands on some short plays. Maybe they make a play, maybe they don't. But this also kind of just goes back to why I like Lazard so much compared to them at similar prices. Um, he's the only one that I can actually envision watching the game and being like, oh, that was a target. Like that was a target for Lazard. That was a target for Lazard. Like they're actually playing a big role as opposed to, oh, that was a gadget play for Gibson or
Right. Yep, exactly. Um 49ers receivers, so Debo Samuel seems like it should be a good matchup. As my friend Derek Brown pointed out, the Jets defense last year played a lot of too high. Debo excelled in too high last year. I'm thinking that Sauce Gardner a little bit more likely to shadow Ayuk. So I do like Debo at the best of the 49ers pass catching options when you don't factor in ownership and salary. Of course, we're going to need to factor those things in. But starting there, any interest in I guess I shouldn't say any interest. Obviously, you're going to have interest in Debo. How are you breaking down, starting with the top three: Debo, Ayuk, Kittle? What's your level of interest in the stud pass catching options? How are you playing it with the Niners?
yeah. I mean, obviously some interest in all of them, but to me, Debo is the guy showing up most, even factoring in salary and ownership. I have him going a little bit under owned at flex. I have his captain ownership pretty much correct. I have Kittle's captain ownership pretty much correct, but going a bit over owned at flex. And then I have Ayuk's ownership across the board pretty much being correct. Obviously, with Ayuk too, though, you do have to keep in mind that if he does end up being limited, that is something that just isn't completely accounted for in Sims. Like it's accounted for as far as you're adjusting his projection down, but it's still not doing a perfect job of accounting for him just not being on the field and getting opportunities some percentage of the time. So realistically, I think that Debo is probably under owned. Kittle is more or less correctly owned, and Ayuk is probably a little over owned.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I think Kittle, I will say that the Jets actually gave up like, I want to say like the seventh most fantasy points to, I don't have it pulled up anymore, but like they actually gave up more fantasy points to tight ends. Like if you look at their schedule adjusted fantasy points per game, actually maybe I have it on this page. Maybe I can pull this up. Here, give me 1 second. But I believe they actually last year, and of course this is last year's data, so it's not going to be perfect for this year. But I think both of these defenses are at least like somewhat similar. It was not the worst matchup. The Jets not the worst matchup for the Niners. So I think I have some interest in, let's see, where are the Jets here? Yeah, sixth in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to tight ends. Of course, this is all pretty flat. Like it's not a huge difference there, but then it was even more over the last 5 games of the year. The Jets were fourth in terms of schedule adjusted. Actually gave up 7 more schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to tight ends than the average. So I don't know. At least worth noting that last year, at least, it was a pretty good matchup being a tight end against the Jets, which does make me a little bit more interested in George Kittle, I think. But yeah, I think I think that you basically, so I think maybe I'm a little bit higher on Kittle than you, but I think in general we're on the same page of like Ayuk going a little bit too high owned for like the coaches saying that he's probably limited. They would guess he's going to be limited, but then you add on I think Sauce Gardner most likely to shadow Ayuk, which these are things that are like kind of I don't really think about on main slates, but when I'm on Showdown, then I start thinking about it a little bit more. It's like, all right, I'll factor that in just a little bit this, a little bit that, and suddenly Debo looks great. Ayuk doesn't look quite as great.
Yeah, the kind of like the weird Showdown, roster construction counterpoint to that though is that in Debo's price range, you also have Aaron Rodgers, you have Wilson, you have Purdy, and then you obviously McCaffrey and Hall for a bit more. There's nobody priced between 8K and 9K on DraftKings other than Brandon Ayuk. There's nobody priced between 7K and 8K other than George Kittle. So there's a lot of builds where even if they're not good for their salary, as long as they're just better than the guys cheaper than them, they still end up being optimal.
And we just talked about the same thing with Mike Williams too, of the like, okay, we don't think he's going to be a full go. He's going to be limited in this game, but like, when are they going to be using Brandon Ayuk?
Right.
Probably for the high value stuff, for the stuff where they're using him as a receiver. So maybe don't want to full fade him. He's coming in at lower ownership as a result. I think I've been seeing sub 30% ownership around the industry.
I have like 22 at Flex right now.
That's where you have projected ownership, or how much you have?
Projected ownership and optimal, basically.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm seeing projected total ownership around 30% ish around the industry.
Total, yeah.
Which
total I have like 26, 27% projected.
Okay. Which like would feel low if not for the fact that we think he's going to be limited. So suddenly it scares me off Ayuk a little bit. I'll probably be a light fade for me on Ayuk.
Which again, like that's the whole thing too that you have to keep in mind with DFS in general is, you can have all these reasons for like why somebody's a good play or not a good play, but it also comes back to like, does the field completely agree with you? And then are they overdoing it? Like obviously we could both sit here and say we hate Ayuk, but then if you told us he's 5% owned, suddenly we're going to love him.
Which is what I'm struggling with on this slate, is because I look at it and I'm like, oh yeah, this is a great spot to fade Mike Williams because he might be limited, all this stuff. And then I look at it's like, oh man, 12% ownership or whatever, 15 across the board. It's like, that feels really low for Mike Williams, who, is an end zone threat. So yeah, you're right. It's like
the first thing that stood out to me when I looked at my like leverage column after I ran my sims this morning was how under-owned I had Mike Williams. And I was like, oh shit, I need to go back and adjust more for his potential role. And then I looked at the ownership column and was like, oh, nobody's playing him. So it's not that he's showing up as optimal that often for me. It's just that I think the field might be overcorrecting.
Yep. With Brandon Ayuk, more limited. Juwan Jennings is 4,000, projects for 4.6 fantasy points. When Ayuk is not out there. So to the extent Ayuk is limited, Juwan Jennings becomes the, I guess, sort of wide receiver 2 on the Niners, obviously still behind Kittle, behind McCaffrey. So still not like an elite pass catching option, but we saw him in the Super Bowl, had a great fantasy game. How much interest do you have in Juwan Jennings at 4,000?
Yeah, I mean, I like him a decent amount as a value. I do have him going a little bit under-owned, but I also have a lot of these value plays in general going under-owned. So definitely somebody that I'd be, wanting to mix in. I do think he's clearly going to have an actual role here. We know he has touchdown equity. So I think he looks solid. I think also how much interest you have in him should kind of depend on how you're treating the Jets receivers. Like if you're treating the Jets receivers as it's just kind of a, crapshoot between Gibson, Corley, Lazard, I don't think any of them are going to have substantially more opportunities than the others. Jennings will look better. Whereas if you're kind of my mindset and you're saying, I think Lazard is going to get more opportunities than those guys, Jennings will look relatively worse because you're just going to end up projecting a 2K Lazard basically similarly to Jennings.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Maybe we need to talk about some rules also with wide receivers. Obviously not wide receivers from opposing teams, but like on the same team. Do you think you'll set any kind of rule of like, I guess you're using a sim, so maybe you don't set these rules, but like, would you, if you're using Opto, do you think you would set a rule of like, if you play Ayuk, then don't play, maybe not Juwan Jennings, maybe that would be more for like the tertiary options, the Ronnie Bell, Jacob Cowing. Do you think you would set any kind of rules in your Opto to not have certain receivers from the same team because of the negative playing time correlation?
I don't really think I would in this particular game. because of the pricing. Like you were gonna say, like even if Ayuk plays, Jennings can still have a good game,
Yeah.
especially for that price. And I think it's kind of the same with the Jets guys. Like even if Mike Williams plays a good amount, there's still going to be a potential role for a 2K Allen Lazard to do well, or Corley or Gibson to get to house that screen or whatever. Like you can still envision that lineup where like Mike Williams actually has a good game, but one of those cheap value pieces still gets there because
Yeah.
they don't have to do
Exactly.
much.
Yeah.
Ronnie Bell, for example, like I'm just not going to get many Ronnie Bell lineups, but if it has Brandon Ayuk, I don't really care. Like I don't think Ronnie Bell is just going to step into like Brandon Ayuk's role if Ayuk is limited. It's more so you're playing him because he's 200. He catches a touchdown, you need him, and that can happen with or without Ayuk on the field, like regardless of the snap count.
Right. I'm looking at these receivers across the space, and looking at the projection for the tertiary Niners receivers. Like obviously, Juwan Jennings is going to be in play. He's a starter regardless of Ayuk status. But then it is kind of interesting looking at there's sort of it varies what people are doing with like Ronnie Bell, Chris Conley, Jacob Cowing, like who is going to play here. Maybe we'll get a little bit of clarity there when inactives come out, but do you have any like what is your level of interest in playing any of these guys? Is there one that stands out to you between Ronnie Bell, Jacob Cowing, Chris Conley? Like, do you think you're going to end up playing much of any of them?
I doubt it, especially in smaller field stuff.
Yeah.
In large field, to me, it's kind of still just kind of rotating through them. I personally don't have a specific take. I do know that there was some talk of on Cowing just like being really impressive with the ball in his hands
Yeah,
and all
it's
that.
like a
So
speedster.
maybe they get him stuff short, but also it's a rookie week one. Like I mean, not that it's apples to apples, but I mean, we just saw Marvin Harrison's week one and all of that.
Yeah.
Like rookies generally struggle out of the gate, no matter who they are or what their role is. So even just the positive talk on Cowing from the preseason, that's something that's likely to potentially likely. If it does manifest itself, it's still more likely to be down the road, not this week. So to me, they're kind of the same play where you're just not playing a lot of them, probably not touching them in small field, but in larger field, it's just getting
Mix them
kind
in.
of mixing and matching them.
Hopefully one or two of them is inactive, and that will like you'll be able to concentrate that bet a little bit, because usually like if I'm 150 max and I want to have a little bit of exposure to these guys just in case like they end up scoring the random touchdown, which I think we've actually seen Ronnie Bell do exactly that, where he like didn't play a whole lot but then scored a touchdown on a showdown slate. I think that they're all capable of potentially having just that one play that gets their unlimited snaps. So yeah, I guess I'm hopeful that there will be some inactives come out of this trio of receivers, because it's kind of a crapshoot.
Tokyo Swan said if Lazard ends up being pretty well owned, don't you just play Corley? To me, this really depends. It just goes back to that inputs conversation. Like for me, because I don't think Lazard and Corley are that comparable in this game. The answer would be no. I mean, depending on what well owned means. If it's like 30% for Lazard, then yeah, I'll say, well, maybe I'm wrong and play more Corley. But assuming we're talking, kind of like it's projected right now, where Lazard is like 12-ish% and Corley's like 3%. I think Lazard is just like he projects better than Corley for me by enough where I'm still just going to play more Lazard because I think that 12% is too low. If you're somebody that thinks it's just going to be kind of a mixed match of opportunities for those three, then yeah, you should be more inclined to look to the 3% on Corley if you think that his opportunity is going to be about the same as Lazard. So it really depends on how you view that. But for me, I think that Lazard at 2K is just clearly a better play than Corley at 1,600, even with the ownership gap.
Yeah, and I almost want to, like, if Lazard's ownership got steamed, I might in that case be more inclined to play Mike Williams too. Like we
Right.
talked about that bet a little bit of like, I mean, if he goes super highly owned, like if it is Mike Williams who ends up coming in for those high value plays in particular, like that's another one that you could just say, all right, if everybody else wants to be betting on Lazard, I'll just bet on Mike Williams coming in and playing in those like high value situations. So I think that's another way you could play it if Lazard ends up pretty high owned.
Yeah, and the other thing too with Corley, like I almost think the conversation is more Gibson. Like I hate even saying this because it's just going to speak a good Corley game into existence. But I almost think the conversation is more Lazard versus Gibson for the same reason we just said with Cowing as far as the rookies go. Like the talk during preseason was that Corley, has explosiveness and all of that, but he's not ready. Like you can't trust him yet. We saw and I'm completely blanking. There's a perfect example, and I can't think of it for whatever reason. But we saw, kind of like Jalen Wright, for example, with Miami.
Oh yeah.
Not even active week one. probably going to play a decent role in that backfield by the end of the season, but not even active week 1. We
It was
saw
Devin Achan last year was actually the same thing. I think he was inactive week 1.
Oh yeah, I'd forgotten about that. The Rivers getting carries ahead of Corum last
Blake
night. Like,
Corum, yeah.
yeah, I mean, even some rookies that are expected to play pretty big roles early still aren't necessarily ready week 1. And then you have somebody like Corley who it's pretty much been no, he's not ready. Do you know how much Burton played yesterday? I didn't actually go back and look.
No, that's a good question. Maybe I can. I wonder
Because
if that's.
he's another example, especially if this goes the way that I want it to, where he's obviously really talented, but everything in the preseason was like this guy's not ready to play NFL snaps. So I actually am curious how this looks. Like if he did play, then obviously it's the opportunities were there with the injuries they have. But like if he didn't play, it reinforces what I'm getting to with Corley, where you're more likely in week 1 to just go to the veterans that you trust.
Let me see if they have updated snap counts for this year. It was not in the data suite yet. Let's see. Bengals. 8% week 1 snap share. He played 4 snaps.
Right.
Yoshivas 100%. Damn. Jamar Chase.
Yeah, I saw that earlier, which just did nothing to piss me off.
Yeah.
They're looking at teams all day that had 5 points from him.
Yeah.
Also, I'm not sure if you saw it or if you played them, but A.D. Mitchell had like 3 wide open touchdowns that Anthony Richardson missed.
I did not see. I actually watched very little football yesterday. It was like the least football I've watched on a Sunday in years because I had not gotten my Sunday Night Football Showdown article done. So I was writing that, and then immediately I had to turn around and prepare for my show for that. So I was just working throughout the NFL slate, which I learned my lesson that I need to get all this stuff done a day ahead of time going forward because that was painful for me because I'm like tracking it, slowing me down, but I'm like not actually watching it, enjoying myself.
I did the same thing. I didn't see like any football yesterday. I'm at my mom's right now, so I don't have my like 5 TVs set up here.
Yeah.
And then I ended up just working on the afternoon slate and showdown stuff during the main slate, so I missed pretty much all of it too.
Before people accuse us of not watching football, I usually watch football all day on Sundays. I think if I can figure out how I'm going to go back and watch every game just for my preparation for next week, I think I'm going to get more into watching every game this year instead of just like the ones that happen to be on.
I usually quote unquote watch, but it involves sitting at a bar and drinking with the games on. So
yeah, I mean it counts. It counts.
Knowing what happens.
Yeah, I'm not like tracking like who played every single play. I'm not doing that kind of stuff. Other people are doing that for me. So
yeah, I can find that data. I don't need to watch every football game.
Yeah. Anything else on receivers, or should we just talk about tight ends briefly?
Yeah, I think that's all of them.
All right. Tight ends, we already sort of talked about George Kittle. I tied him in with the Niners receivers. Didn't do the same thing with the Jets receivers. Tyler Conklin is 3,600. 61 receptions last year. That was the most of anybody in the NFL who did not score a touchdown. 61 receptions, 0 touchdowns last year for Tyler Conklin. Now he gets Aaron Rodgers back. He's 3,600. Projects really well here at fantasy points. How are you feeling about Tyler Conklin today?
Yeah, I kind of feel like I need to get a little bit higher projection on him. I have him at like 7.5 DraftKings points. He's showing up as optimal like 24% of the time, but the field's at like 28%. So I have him as like one of those really flat, like mid-range optimal plays, and they're like about the same percentage of the time being optimal as like Kittle, Ayuk, Moody, the Niners defense, Zerline, kind of in that tier, which I think is just like, I think that tier kind of is in some cases going a little over-owned compared to the cheaper guys. But yeah, like I think he looks fine. He's another one where there's nobody priced like right there with him. The Jets defense is $400 less. But other than that, there's nobody between Jordan Mason at 3K and Jawan Jennings at 4K. So I think he just kind of ends up in a lot of lineups, both as far as being built and optimal percentage, where there's just a lot of ways the slate can go where he doesn't even need to have that good of a game. He just needs to have a better game than like Lazard and Corley and those guys.
Yeah, I feel like it comes down to like it's been sort of the story of this slate of like all the things that I'm like, oh, I really want to do this on this slate. I look at ownership, it's like, oh, and so does everybody else. Like I'm really into Tyler Conklin on this slate. I really wanted to be excited about playing him at low ownership, and then I look at the ownership and it's like, nope, not low owned at all. Projecting around the industry for let's see, around over 30% ownership. I'll check a second source here, but he looks like he's going to be owned quite a bit, so it becomes less exciting for me. I like the bet. I think he's all right, 30% total here. So I think it's a solid enough bet at that number, but like I don't really want to be playing that much more than 30% of Tyler Conklin in my lineups. I do think like he's due for some positive regression. He was a big target for me in best ball all year, but looks like there's going to be some ownership there. And then Jeremy Rucker projecting for 2.7 fantasy points at 1,200. If I'm being honest with you, I have not looked closely at Jeremy Rucker. This is one that I'll probably dig into a little bit more before my show tonight. Did you have any thoughts on Jeremy Rucker? How much are you getting to him?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any thoughts on him. I know nothing about him, but he's projected for like 8% ownership. I have him optimal like 9 to 10% of the time. It's just a price play where you could change his name to literally anything. Tell me he's the backup tight end and he's active on a showdown slate, and he's going to be like 5 to 10% to be optimal.
Yeah. And I guess there were people who had concerns during best ball season about Tyler Conklin maybe losing some of the role to Jeremy Ruckert. And as you can see here, I guess projecting for him to have at least a little bit of the role for the Jets. So, maybe you can factor like backup tight end can score a touchdown on a showdown slate. You see it all the time. I made the point yesterday that I liked Davis Allen quite a bit yesterday because I thought he might have a bigger role than people were anticipating. Which I don't get a catch, but he had at least.
I went to bed halfway through that game, but I think Parkinson played a ton.
Parkinson did play a ton. There was Davis Allen had like a look in the red zone, but I think it may have been due to injury, so didn't end up really didn't work out for Davis Allen for sure. But
I did see him. I know they targeted him in the first half when I was watching, and it was just like a high throw off his hands on the sideline.
Yeah, exactly. But then I think this is another situation where like there is volatility. We don't really know what the playing time is going to be. We all make the assumption that it's going to be the Conklin show again. I think that it's very likely to be the Conklin show again, that he's going to be the lead tight end. But I think there is at least a little bit of volatility here that we don't really know for sure. Jeremy Ruckert does have, a projection at every site that's like more than one fantasy point. So he's expected to at least potentially have some opportunity to score. He just needs to catch the ball and maybe it's in the end zone. So seems like a pretty good bet.
Yeah, to me, Ruckert isn't like a play like going to steal playing time type play for me. Like, yeah, maybe he does, and if you have him, great. But to me, it's more like, yeah, he's a big dude, and if he happens to be the one open when Rodgers throws it from the 7-yard line, then you need him.
Yeah, especially in a low scoring game, like just one touchdown could be enough to make it pay off. He's another one that's like, yeah, I'll probably score a couple touchdowns this season at some point. Could happen tonight. There's no real reason.
So kind of going back, I just happened to think of it since we just spent the whole show talking about how the Jets have no receivers. Do you happen to know, like I can pull it up, but you might know. Do you happen to know like how often they ran 2 tight end sets, or how often they like moved Conklin to the slot or anything in the past?
I don't know. That is something that I should be able to find in the data suite, but
yes, I have it open. I just didn't know if you
okay
already knew.
All right, we'll look up the amount of 2 tight end sets the Jets run. I don't think it's a ton, but I'm going to let you look it up instead of looking it up myself, because I will just struggle to find it immediately. It will take me a little bit of time to find it in the data suite.
Yeah,
I don't immediately know where it is. Okay. Yeah, I mean that is a good point. Like that would make him a little bit more interesting if we think they are going to run some 2 tight end sets. But yeah, I'm playing some Conklin, some interest in Jeremy Ruckert at relatively. Actually, let me look up the ownership on Jeremy Ruckert. I'm assuming it is fairly low owned, but I could be wrong here. Yeah, single digit projected ownership on Jeremy Ruckert seems fair at his price tag.
I mean, Fantasy Points has Conklin with the most slot routes on the Jets last season.
Oh yeah. I mean, he was out there. He was just
right. So I just don't know about how often was Ruckert on the field.
Yeah,
which would be personnel, not.
Here, I can pull up. If we were just trying to see how much he was on the field last year, I thought you were looking like specifically for how often they were on the field together. Which I
wanted both.
Oh, actually, I think I can do that split here. All right, so let's see.
I just don't remember where to find the personnel
split with. I'm pretty sure I can do it here, but I don't know that I immediately know how. Let's see.
It's definitely there because I found it yesterday for something. I just don't remember where I found it.
Okay. split with.
I think I got it.
Okay.
Except I don't know that it's going to show me exactly what I want. But so if I sorted by 12 personnel last season, 39 overall routes for Conklin, 38 for Ruckert. So they didn't do it a lot. Like,
yeah,
Garrett Wilson ran the most routes out of 12 personnel, and he ran 87.
Yeah, that was I mean that's good info to have, that they're just not doing a lot of two tight end sets, so probably it will be one or the other. You look here, route percentage for the season last year, Tyler Conklin 61.4%, Jeremy Ruckert 19.7%. I guess I can split this out just for like the end of the season, see if there are any kind of differences that would lead us to think that maybe Ruckert will have more of a role. But yeah, I think like the most likely scenario is that it's Conklin towards the end of the year, 62% route participation, Ruckert up to 27%. So I guess he saw a little bit of improvement there. Yeah, my guess is it's more of the same. It's going to be mostly Tyler Conklin. Ruckert will be there for some plays, could be the one who scores a touchdown. So I think our analysis stands on this essentially.
Yeah. If we had pulled that up and it was just like, oh, they did this a lot more than we thought, then it would increase the chances that like Lazard, that none of those receivers are really on the field and they just go this route. But it seems not super likely.
I guess this is a good opportunity to remind people, since Fantasy Points CFB showing up in chat, you can get 25% off any Fantasy Points product using promo code Flannelman. That includes the data suite that we're looking at here. It's the projections that I've been using here. All of this is Fantasy Points. So if you want to check out the fantasy, it's a great data suite. Like, there is so much data in here. I do highly recommend it. 25% off using promo code Flannelman. All right. Defenses and kickers, Adam. My general thought is very good on this slate. I think it could be very low scoring. My hot take that I gave earlier on Roto Grinders was I think there's a kicker. It's obviously hot take, not likely to happen, but like I could see it happening. There's a kicker who outscores both quarterbacks on this slate. Was a hot take that I gave. I think that's well within the realm of possibility. How much defenses and kickers are you getting to?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a hot take, but it is entirely possible. I have right now Moody, the Niners, and Zerline all going at least somewhat under owned in flex, and actually the Niners going very slightly under owned at captain. I have the Jets a little bit over owned, but still not by like any crazy margin that would make me think I'm like intentionally fading them. So yeah, I mean, I think they all look pretty good here. I mentioned it a second ago when we were talking about Conklin, I think, but like Moody, the Niners, Zerline in particular, all showing up in that same like optimal range for me with Ayuk and Conklin and Kittle.
Yep. Also, another reminder, I always forget to do this. It actually makes an impact, I found, reminding people to subscribe to our channel. So we're actually simulcasting on this one. I would recommend subscribing to whichever channel you're watching. If you're on the Endgame Syndicate channel, make sure you subscribe there. If you're on the Flannelverse channel, would appreciate you subscribing here as well. But also go find the other one, because we both do a lot of content. I'll be doing another Showdown show tonight. Adam started doing Sunday morning shows on Sundays, and Adam was the person that I was listening to on Sunday morning when I won a million a few years ago. So I know Adam does great NFL content as well. So make sure you are subscribed to both the Flannelverse and the Endgame Syndicate channels if you are not already. We both appreciate it as we try to grow our channels. All right, so I think we've covered all of the positions. Do you have any other macro takes to give Adam before we? Oh, and I forgot. I stopped using this on the side. I was receivers. We did tight ends. We did defenses and kickers. I guess now we're not going to build any lineups on this show. But do you have any final thoughts? Any hot takes? Any big stands you're taking on this slate?
I mean, I think Lazard's likely to be the stand, kind of the more that we've talked about it. I feel like, and obviously, if you disagree with my thought process, then I wouldn't follow it. But like, of everything we said on the show, it felt like a lot of just like, oh yeah, the field's right here, or yeah, it looks fine. Except for Lazard, where it's just like, I think there's volatility in the projections there, and I have a pretty strong lean towards Aaron Rodgers just wanting his guy out there when the competition is Gibson or a rookie. And again, like the fact that they didn't use a lot of 12 personnel last season makes me like Lazard more. because either they're going to change the personnel that they like to use, or they're probably going to just go to Rodgers' guy. I did also just pull up because I had mentioned the Niners at captain, just to see who showed up most often with them. McCaffrey, like 84% of the time that the Niners were the optimal captain for me, was at a flex spot. Purdy was at 68%, Kittle at 57, Debo at 43. Hall and Wilson were in those lineups 40% of the time each, which I think makes sense given that they both just are likely to catch a lot of passes, may or may not get in the end zone. But I thought that was kind of noteworthy just because of the type of players that they are, that, they're the type of guys that I'd want to play against even if I'm playing the opposing defense.
Yeah. Very nice. I feel like I've flipped on this. I think like during the show, I've flipped from being like, I'm going to full fade Mike Williams to, he seems like a pretty good play. Maybe I should be above weight to the guy who is like an end zone threat in a game that's not going to score a lot of touchdowns. So I'm very much going back and forth on what I'm going to do there. But I do think the more we talked about it, the more I'm like, maybe I should just play the good receiver who's going to be out there probably for the valuable plays. And we don't know how limited he's going to be exactly. So I'm struggling. I'm struggling right now with the best approach to this, but I think we covered like the reasoning behind all of it so like play it whichever way you want. Like if Lazard, definitely we're both pretty into Lazard. I do think that I'm like, that would be maybe if I were playing 10 lineups, I would consider setting a rule for Lazard and Mike Williams. We talked about like, I think they could both get there. I definitely would not set this rule if I were playing 150 lineups, but like maybe in a 10 lineup set, I'd be more inclined to be like, all right, I'm just going to not play them in the same lineup. Because even though they both can get there, it's obviously some negative correlation there. So I don't know. It's a tough slate. It's definitely a tough slate, but I feel like we've done a pretty good job of breaking it down. All right. We will close it out. You doing any more content coming up, Adam?
Yeah, 5 p.m. on the Endgame Syndicate channel, MLB tournament show, going through my DraftKings exposures over there for anybody still playing MLB this year.
All right. Check out Adam tonight. I will be doing another Showdown show prior to lock if you're playing NFL Showdown tonight on the Flannelverse channel. Thank you all for hanging out with us. If you have any other questions, you can bring them to me tonight. I'm not sure if we got to all. I was trying to get to most of the questions as we went, but I'm sure that I missed plenty early on that I meant to come back to. Oh, best. Oh, I will ask this one because I remember it from earlier. Best play under 4,000. Is it just Allen Lazard for you, Adam?
Let me double check, but I think so. Under 4,000. I mean, most likely to succeed is Conklin, but I think relative to ownership, it's going to be Lazard once I update where I actually am on Lazard.
Yep, I think that is a good call. I also really like defense. I think Jets defense at 3,200 might be my answer, but yeah, I like Lazard. I like Conklin. I like Jordan Mason. I think at Braylon Allen, I think are both solid plays. I like your call about Braylon Allen. Like might just have a role that he could play with Breece Hall. I think he's more likely to have a good game with Breece Hall in the lineup, so that's kind of interesting. But yeah,
I don't think that's the most likely outcome. I think it's, but if you get a game where the Jets backup receivers are all kind of just like interchangeable and none of them really do anything, and then neither defense scores a touchdown, neither kicker goes nuts, like you just get like the low scoring game, but in a way where neither defense is great either. I think that's kind of the game where you could just get Hall and Allen being optimal, or even just Allen being optimal without vulturing Hall or anything.
Yep. Good call. All right. Check out Adam tonight on his MLB show. Check out me tonight on my Showdown show. I think this is a lot of fun for me. Hopefully we will do this again on Thursday. We have made no commitments for how long we're going to keep doing the show, but I really enjoyed doing the show with Adam. Hopefully you guys did as well. Make sure you like both of our channels, subscribe to our channels, and if you do, we're more likely to continue doing it. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll catch you tonight.